Introducing the workshop. The Asian American Writers Workshop is a writer's space and writing nonprofit. It started servicing mostly East Asian people, but now supports all sorts of Asian people, broadly considered. I was a fellow here last year, and I'm moderating tonight's panel featuring Andrea and Jennifer, two queer Arab artists. Andrea starting by reading, and then they have a video, and Jennifer has slides of their art. And then we'll do a moderated talk and Q&A after. I'm going to introduce Andrea. Andrea Abi Karim is an Arab-American genderqueer punk poet, performer, cyborg, writing on the art of killing bros, the intricacies of cyborg bodies, trauma, and delayed healing. Their chapbook, The Aftermath, attempts to queer Fanon's vision of how poetry fails to inspire revolution. Simone White selected their second assemblage, Villainy, forthcoming with Les Figues. They toured with Sister Spit March 2008 and are hyped to live in New York. EXTRATRANSMISSION is their first book. As Etel Adnan writes, as the war machine creates new casualties and new ways to produce them, Andrea Abi Karim creates a new language and a new form to express their desire to shake the American public out of its lethargy. In these days of indifference to naked reality, Andrea dares to be a writer of humanism. They dare to remind us that each one of us is somehow responsible for everything that is done in our name. Welcome, Andrea.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming on this spring rainy night. I'm going to read from my first book, EXTRATRANSMISSION, which is actually sold out except for the 30 copies in the back. So it's getting reprinted. But if you don't have a copy, now is kind of your only chance to get a first edition. I'm super excited to be here and that Rami is back from their travels and to perform with Jennifer Camper. I'm going to read from the book and then screen a 4-minute film that's based off of the book that's a collaboration with Lixie and Dorsey Bass. I used to work in a lab with rats for a long time, a memory lab. We were trying to figure out what part of their tiny brains could remember how to navigate space, what told them which way to go. A model for humans, a model for curing Alzheimer's, a model for navigation, a model for humanless navigation, a model for drones. I quit shortly after the lab got funding from the U.S. Department of Defense. Did you know that if you're a combat veteran with PTSD, you can get a nonprofit that is funded by the CIA to give you a dog? I want a dog. Check 1, check 2, check 3, can you hear me? Check 4, is the room empty? Check 5, can you hear me? Check 6, oh well. Check 7, my story is empty anyway. Check 8, lights off. Check 9, good night. Check 10, next on CNN, a poetry of directness. Kill all the noise bros who move to Brooklyn and tell everyone desperately that the noise they're making is the only thing they believe in. Kill all the bro poets. Actually, you know what? Kill all the bros. Kill all the power dynamics in the room. Kill all the power dynamics in the white room. Kill all the power dynamics in all the rooms. Pull them down by their greasy cables. Get your hands dirty. Kill all the hierarchies of power of who is publishing who and who is fucking who and who they fucked before they got published. Publish who they fucked or don't. Kill the nonprofit board of poets who scheduled the endless summer reading during Dyke March this Saturday, and kill the sociality that makes queers feel excluded and that makes the orgy dangerous for our bodies and that makes you select who to make eye contact with and who to ignore on alternating nights, and which beer to schedule on which day and which bar to go to after which reading, and kill the system that was designed to alienate everyone from each other and that caused this desperate sociality to emerge, and kill the system of gendered power that makes it so hard to inhabit every moment in my my own skin, to know how to detect each buzz like counting the number of trains that pass at night, and kill the language of avoidance that made it so hard for me to write this. Check 11. Is anybody out there? On the surface of the signature injury, on the surface, circle one option below: mild, moderate, severe. In the framework of it all, the female body in combat reads differently, computes differently, glitches differently, that the female body in combat is not a state of on opposed to off, it's a state of always on, always watching, waiting for the moment of the signature injury, whatever it might be. It costs so much to maintain the body in constant combat. It must consume and consume and consume just to stay awake before it burns it all away too fast. She gnaws at her own fingertips to stay alert, to stay awake, to stay warm. Easy to get cold out there in the desert at night. Hard to maintain the skin sealed to the bones below, to the meat beneath, against each blast and every impact. The environment tries to pull it apart, make little entrances for itself, ports to communicate information back to the base, shuttle information back up the chain of command, ports to communicate information, ports to channel energy into the surroundings, static shoots across the dry desert air. As if it's not enough to just exist in constant combat, command wants the full download, the full extra transmission she's tried so hard to keep sewn strictly in. Direct line to read each electric impulse each time a muscle moves, brace on brace, skin just a shell, plastic sheeting to keep the muscle moist, a case for your new iPhone X. Release innermost secrets through your fingertips, eyes just a mirror, a high-resolution scan of the surroundings, breaks in vision noted, breaks in brush noted. Lack of cover noted, body just a case for desirable information until they get a new shipment in of those who must volunteer their own skin cases to protect the TV set in your living room, to enter combat, to take orders, to take the fall. Every body is consumable. Every American body is consumable. There's a whole country back home willing to manufacture more bodies for the volunteer-based army, a country that sometimes agrees to relax its borders in exchange for the combat-ready body, for the soft skin that caves in from every bit of shrapnel, for the soft skull that splits on impact, for the soft brain that bounces back and forth inside the skull, for the soft brain that tears and swells, for the soft brain that after the tears and the swells still turns the body back on, still serves, for the soft person who can't remember. On the assembly line to American nationalism, little clicks along the conveyor belt. As of 2017, 375 230 U.S. troops had sustained a traumatic brain injury, or TBI. TBIs are the signature injury of the war on terror. They are severe concussions where past memories are erased and daily memory continues to be difficult. You're in an armored vehicle somewhere in Iraq or Afghanistan on a desert road, not a lot of cover, and your vehicle gets hit by a rocket-propelled grenade, or you drive over the tripwire for an improvised explosive device. There is a blast. You are thrown into the wall or the roof or the ground. Your body hits the wall or the roof or the ground hard, with force. Bones break. Your brain moves back and forth against the inside of your skull. Like all those really sick drunk driving movies where no one survives that you have to watch in driver's ed when you're 16. It's like that, except you survive the blast. Get up and run. Your body survives, but now you have to cope with becoming a new person. Select a PDA from the moving belt. Slide the PDA all the way into the port. It should not hurt. It should feel comfortable. It should feel natural. There may be initial misfirings. You may see scans of the calendar behind the eyes. They will feel like dreams. You won't miss any appointments. And remember, it's just a prototype. You will not be satisfied. Head-on collision, double vision. This is not, I forgot my wallet at home during Mercury retrograde. This is not, oh, I forgot you two even dated. Sorry if it's awk now that we're fucking. This is not, I don't remember spraining my ankle because I was wasted, but now it hurts sometimes. This is not textbook PTSD. This is the end of the canon in an attempt to adapt in a world that constantly fails me. This is the end of a person and the beginning of a malfunctioning cyborg, an irreversible detachment from my body, a walking ghost. This is about how the American tragedy isn't about all the walking ghosts. At what point did you realize there was something very, very wrong? What you can't see can't hurt you. Do you remember the blast? There are stories of machines that enter bodies, machines that enter armor, pierce the skin, machines that force their way through, machines that force their way through boundaries, through borders, through armored shells, through skin. Just a few scratches and bruises, bump on the head, nothing major, right major, yes major, right left major, keep moving, keep driving, keep fighting, worry about the bruises later. There is a blast, there is an impact, there is the wall or the roof or the ground. There is a blast, an impact, a force against you. There is the wall, the roof, the ground, the sharp metal edge. There is a blast and how to become a new glitch, a new disruption. Grow a new port of internal to external connection, a new point of fusion, not as systematized control of the pulse signal data buzz package, but as a point of disruption. I can yell at you all I want, but still nobody else knows what's going on. I just need to find my words. Teach me how to remember. Teach me how to become a new person. Teach me how to not get lost in the maze. Teach me how to become a new rat. I look out beyond the glass pasted on my face and I can't see anything that I want. I'm already disconnected. Eyes no longer the lens of the worldwide view. Just for me, one malfunctioning cyborg among many. It feels important to remember the before. I look up sometimes and just try to see it, try and catch a glimpse of purple lightning shooting across from point to point, moment to moment, memory to memory. This state gave you the PDA, but it also gave you the injury. Which came first, the injury or the tech? The injury. It's always the injury. What if I need this hand for something else, to stab the cop in the eye with the screwdriver or the bro in the ear with the pen, or to get me off instead of getting me there on time? It's just not coming together. It's just not on the outside looking in. It was just a little bit dangerous on the outside looking in. Is this what you signed up for? Is this what you signed up for? A ghost that would live on and on. I am choosing elements from a source document. I'm obsessing over so many things. I'm trying to think about body autonomy. I'm trying to get off. I am trying to short out. There is a blast, there is an impact, there is the information, the electricity, the shrapnel, the bodies, the feeling, there is the sharp metal edge, there is a blast, and thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Jennifer Camper is a cartoonist and graphic artist living in New York City. Her art examines life from a perspective that is irreverent, female, queer, and mongrel. Her work often explores gender, race, class, and politics, as well as sexuality, mermaids, and robots. She's also a cartoon editor, a teacher, and the creator of the biennial Queers in Comics conference. Her books include Rude Girls and Dangerous Women, a collection of her cartoons, and subGURLZ, a graphic novella following the adventures of 3 women living in abandoned subway tunnels. She also edited 2 Juicy Mother Comics anthologies. Her cartoons and illustrations have appeared in numerous publications and have been exhibited internationally. Welcome, Jennifer.
So you can see the slides. Can we turn off these lights? Thank you. So let's see if I'm doing this right. Yeah. I draw comics from my own perspective, and that is queer, female, and mongrel. I'm half Lebanese and half American, white, from European descent. Mostly what I'm doing is looking at the world and being really amazed by mainstream America. And so my work is a little bit of a commentary on how the mainstream looks from my perspective. Because I don't necessarily look Arab and I get white privilege and my name is made up, a lot of people don't realize I'm half Arab, so I kind of feel like a spy in the white world. And so a lot of times I just observe what people say and put them in my comics. Can you all read this? It's called White Anxiety. But I also make fun of my own people. This is 6 reasons why lesbians should not get married. You really don't need 5 decks of tofu goddess tarot cards, and you'll have terrible arguments over whether to register at the hardware store or the sex toy emporium. Family members will refuse to attend the wedding and you'll feel rejected. Family members will attend the wedding and you'll feel embarrassed. And if you break up, your friends will resent the fact that you get to keep the presents. And there will never, ever be another occasion when you can both wear those expensive matching tuxedos. Hey kids, are you female of Middle Eastern descent and living in the US? Then you're eligible to play that exciting game that's sweeping the nation. It's called, I'm not a terrorist, but if you mess with me, I will hurt you. 5 points for every different pronunciation of Iran and Iraq you hear on TV. 10 points for every time you have to explain the Iranian thing. Come on, we've all had to do this, right? 10 points for every time you hear about Arab women's need for Western feminism. 10 points for every non-Arab, non-Muslim, henna tattoo-wearing, belly dance class-taking woman with Arabic-named children who tells you, it's not racism, but if an olive-skinned man with a beard gets on the plane, I'm getting off. Khadija, Jamal, let's go. Sorry, I'm too fast with the clicker. 20 points for every time you hear this. If we include a Palestinian speaker, then we have to include the Israeli point of view for balance. And yet you rarely hear this for every other group. If we include an African American speaker, then we have to include the KKK point of view for balance. 10 points for every extra hour spent in an airport if you're wearing hijab. 10 points for every time your Muslim grandfather yells at you for not wearing hijab. 20 points for every time you find yourself explaining, not all Arabs are Muslim and not all Muslims are Arabs. 10 points for every time you separate your eyebrows or wax your mustache. 20 points for every time you don't. And the score, no matter how many points you accumulate, you don't win anything. This is a comic I did called Methods Women Have Used When Medical Abortion is Unavailable. It's horror stories, and unfortunately, it's still relevant today. When you outlaw abortion, you just outlaw safe abortions. And these are all things that people turn to when they don't have access. This is an interactive comic. You all take part in this. It's called Feminist or Not. I want you to yell out, feminist or not, all right? I'm keeping track of every reading I do, so this is important. Pink power tools, feminist or not? No? Pop star in lingerie singing about female empowerment while twerking, feminist or not? Ah, good answer. Female senator against abortion, feminist or not? Women smoking in the 1920s, feminist or not? Lipstick with assertive names. First female firefighter in town who says, I'm no feminist. Is she a feminist or not? Female serial killers. Body hair. This next is an excerpt from a comic called Ramadan, and Ramadan Mubarak to everyone who's celebrating right now. This was one of the first comics I did that was not from my perspective, and it was not my story to tell. So I was really nervous about doing it, and I interviewed a bunch of people, and I took their stories, and I fictionalized them, and sort of merged them together to tell this story. And I told it in the second person to reflect that it was somebody else's story, not my own. I'm not Muslim. I was raised very non-religious, but I had a lot of friends who were Muslim and Arab and queer women, so I was really fascinated by their experiences, and I wanted to put that into a story. When you think about being Lebanese, you think about lemons and connecting eyebrows. In your mind, lemons are traditional in Arabic. And all your relatives had connecting eyebrows. The women would separate theirs with silver tweezers. Usually you had two pictures to choose from. You knew your identity was richer than that, and yet you also secretly gloried in the stereotypes. You are a walking contradiction, unfeminine woman, Arab born in the US, lesbians who speaks Arabic, Muslim who eats pussy. Here, have a donut. You used to lie. No thanks, I'm on a diet. Oh, me too. I just hate having those extra 5 pounds. Do you ever throw up? Then you told the truth. No thanks, I'm fasting. Oh, are you Buddhist? No, Muslim. Muslim, right. They face east when they pray. Well, not in India. But isn't that the religion where the men beat the women? Now you just refuse politely. It's much less complicated. No thanks, I just ate. In some ways, growing up Arab prepared you for being a dyke. The endless discussions about identity. An Arab is someone who speaks Arabic. What about Iran and Armenia? Middle Eastern is too colonialist. Southwest Asian, North African is more inclusive, more confusing, and on and on and on. And in the queer community. She's such a dyke. You mean butch? Sort of butchy femme, soft butch. I'd say hard femme. Top, bottom, pre-op trans. I heard she switches, and on and on and on. There's the outing celebrities in the Arab world fighting all the people in the news who are Arab. And doing the same thing in the lesbian community. And there's making that split-second decision about when to publicly identify yourself. Did you see those cool pictures on TV of us bombing Iraq? We kicked Arab butt. Well, can you believe that gays want to adopt children? Isn't that disgusting? Well, and the need to know self-defense when you're Arab and when you're a dyke. Sometimes in my comics I don't even put people in just because objects have lives too. These are complaints from your toys. Your wagon says, we never go where I want to go. Your teddy bear says, put your pants on for Christ's sake. Your horse says, harder, damn it, ride me harder. And your rubber ducky, sometimes I want to take a bath all by myself. This is a new comic I did called A Slow Intermittent Leak. And this is an excerpt from a longer story, and I have it for sale in the back. On Saturday, while Rhonda was cleaning her bathroom, she noticed a slow intermittent leak from under the sink. She stuck a bucket under the pipe. Then she saw the box of tampons. It was over half full. She'd always noted her periods with a small star on her calendar. Her last one had been 10 months ago. Had that been her final one? The beginning of menstruation is noticed. It comes as a surprise. First periods are remembered. The last period is usually insignificant when it happens. It's only remarkable months later, made important by its future absence. She hadn't mourned the change. She joked that the money she used to spend on tampons was now spent on marijuana and mamul. But what should she do with the last box? Burn it in a ritualistic ceremony? Give it to her niece when she started menstruating. Then a whole bunch of other stuff happens. Still furious, she gets mad. She walked to her favorite diner for coffee. And in the next booth are these two men. I can't believe that motherfucker put up such a fight. Yeah, what a tough bastard. She often eavesdrops on nearby conversations. I was surprised that the boss wanted to get rid of him. Maybe he was stealing. People paid no attention to older women. I heard he fucked the boss's mistress. No shit. She liked to imagine the lives these people led. Oh, who knows really? Hell, we get paid not to ask questions. Right. But there was so much blood. Usually the talk in the diner was mundane and boring. Yeah, he was a fucking fountain. I hate cleaning up those little globs. They get into everything. But occasionally she overheard more intriguing conversations. We should get paid extra for those globs. Yeah, right? Then a bunch of teenagers come in. I'm getting large fries and chocolate cake and onion rings. Breakfast of champions. Anyone got a tampon? Are you on the rag again? Haha, Shark Week, Crimson Tide. Yeah, this period is like a fucking river. You got those bloody chunks? Chunks? I get those sometimes. Geez, my periods are gushers. Mine too. I could bleed a tsunami. We got those waterfall pussies. Shut the fuck up. People are trying to eat here. You brats are fucking disgusting. Goddamn sick little bitches, nasty sluts. Don't make me laugh. I'm gushing. Rhonda thought about those girls while she walked home. And the story goes on from there. Sometimes I do comics in other places than paper. This is a mural I did. And then we filled it in. Robots and mermaids. And then this is some wallpaper I designed. And here's some close-ups. Whoops. And this is called Busts. Well, it's not going to go back. And I don't know if you can read that. The senator is amused by amendments. There's a bowling champ. It says pink balls. And the wrestler has toes of death. The superheroine kissed villains. The banshee is tired of wailing. And the tomboy beat up your brother. Oh. And those are my slides.
Thanks, you guys. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
I'm going to start by asking you both a question and then ask you each an individual question, and then I'll open it up. Jennifer kind of touched on this, having grown up half Lebanese and non-Muslim, and I generally find like Arab Americanness to be this hard to describe thing. And I guess I'm just curious about how y'all relate to that identity category. Like, what does it mean to you relative to your upbringings? And I guess, like, do you have any opinions about this, let's call it a dichotomy between, like, diasporic cultural production and, you know, things that are happening in the, like, the Middle East proper? I think there's somewhat of a divide, and I guess I'm just curious to know what y'all think of it.
Why don't you go first?
Well, I'm always feeling like, for a long time, I always felt that I wasn't authentic because I really grew up I was born in the United States. I grew up very assimilated. My name is made up. We don't know our Arabic name. And most of the Arabs I knew were relatives. And it wasn't until I met queer Arabs that I found an Arab family. And so I kind of feel like, well, am I a true Arab? Am I white? Am I, you know, I get white privilege often. And then I just realized that, no, I'm mixed, and that's my identity. And I feel like being mongrel, I like the word mongrel because it's kind of the idea that there's all this stuff mixed in and you don't really know what it all is. And so I really feel like my identity is Arab mongrel, and that feels true to me and true to my experience.
Thanks.
I am similarly I'm half Lebanese, and I grew up very assimilated in the United States. And my dad immigrated from Lebanon before I was born, and my mom was from the Bronx. And while I was kind of going through this like self-articulation around like race and identity, and also like queerness and transness and understanding, I first went, when I was younger, I first went towards mixed race because I was interested in like the slipperiness around kind of unnaming and also being genderqueer and trans. I was kind of like this weird refusal. And then I found Arab American community and Arab community, and I shifted towards like strongly identifying as Arab American. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's particularly important for Lebanese people to choose Arabness over Lebaneseness because Lebanon is like a weird white, like, colony type situation. It's like the whitest Arab country for sure. So yeah, it's cool that y'all sort of like pan-Arabize your art. Question for Andrea. I'm curious about how the cyborg figures into your work. I was struck by it in the reading, and also I guess it's just aesthetically in the video. So yeah, like how is it operating
Yeah, I love talking about cyborgs. So the cyborg, for me personally and in the book, operates in a multitude of ways. I first came to the cyborg in the book as the character who was featured in my reading experiences traumatic brain injury, loses her memory, and then uses these technological adaptations with which to navigate the everyday. And so she has to basically become a new person, as I said in the reading, and she uses technology to do so. And so it's like a cyborg adaptation post the violences and traumas of the war on terror. And it functions twofold as also trans identity and using surgery and hormones to adapt and shift and change every day.
Cool. Jennifer, I guess I'm just curious about how the comics world works and how your work figures into that. I was especially struck by the black KKK and Palestine Israel analogy, and I don't know, I feel like mainstream publishing literature would definitely not publish something like that. So I'm curious about the political climate of your genre and how you interact with it given the content that you're making.
Yeah, the comics world, there's superhero comics and then there's other kinds of comics. So let's see. There was in the 70s, 60s and 70s, there was underground comics, which was people doing comics about adult themes, including sex and drugs. And from the underground comics, there grew out an offshoot of comics by women and comics by openly queer people. And I sort of came along at the tail end of that. And my work was mostly published in queer publications and feminist publications. So I lived and worked in a ghetto that was, I got a lot of responses, both pro and con, but it was really, my audience was mostly queer. And now the comics world has opened up in a way that's different. And I think the mainstream is sort of 25 years behind what queer people are doing. So the stuff that I did in the 90s, now the mainstream is catching up. And that publishing is opening up, and now there's room for queers and people of color to do alternative literary comics in that way. But the comics world is very complicated and, like any industry, full of racism and sexism and homophobia. So
I kind of want to ask the analog of that question to Andrea, and just you get pretty explicit in your critiques of publishing, and I'm curious about what it was like writing that, if you've received flack in response to it. It's stuff that we talk about behind closed doors, I guess, but it's not often published so explicitly. So what was writing that like, and how has it been reading it and stuff?
That's a great question. When I first wrote that piece that you're referring to, the Czech poem, I believe, I felt very confrontational and a little bit nervous to read it, and I read it in a workshop, and it was extremely well received. And I kind of thought I was going to be in this fight or something in a classroom, and it was actually led to this great conversation, conversations that should be happening more publicly about how publishing works and about how straight and how resources are consolidated amongst normie straight people in publishing. I mean, to my knowledge, that piece hasn't been critiqued directly at me, but I actually, it was a piece that I haven't read that much in public until the book was in the book form, and I've been reading it a lot since the book came out, and it feels amazing to read it. And I mean, I love like small press publishing and zine culture and the way that poetry moves in socially rather than through capital. Yeah.
I want to say something about criticism, and one of the things, I get a lot of criticism from both sides, and I mean, people who don't like my work because they're homophobic or racist or whatever, and then people who don't think I'm politically correct enough. And I always respond by saying, thank you so much for writing, you know, if they're emailing me, or thank you so much for your comments. And I think it's a really good way to deal with criticism is to just thank people, because they get totally thrown off guard. And basically what I'm thanking them for is for reading my comics and thinking about them. I don't care if you hate them or if you disagree with them, that's fine. But I feel like the fact that somebody read them and thought about them is like, and it just is my way of dealing with, you know, wacky people who write me. So it's very effective. I encourage everybody to use it.
Thanks, y'all. Does anyone in the audience have questions?
How much do you feel in dialogue with the Arab world in either of your work?
I mean, I feel like because I live in America that I can't speak for anyone else's story, but I feel that I can speak as an Arab in America, and I feel like that's what I know. So I wouldn't, you know, unless I'm writing a comic about somebody else, I wouldn't necessarily speak to somebody else's experience in another world or another country or another even another environment in the U.S. that I'm not part of. But I'm very aware of what's going on, and I think it probably, you know, seeps into my awareness somehow, but I don't consciously try to speak for those experiences.
I mean, I'm trying to be in conversation with, like, global works as much as possible. There are the limitations of, like, small press distribution, and feel like very immediately and actively in conversation with other Arab American writers in the U.S. and here in New York and in the Bay Area where I lived. And I'm hoping that I will tour and the book will make it through borders.
It's also confusing sometimes because we do our work, and I guess for me anyway, I'm my first reader. So I'm doing the work that I wish was out there. And then it kind of goes out in the world, and I've spoken to queer Arab women who are living in, you know, countries that are in the Middle East or North Africa or wherever. And they're like, Jen, I can't show this to my mom. I'm trying to not get kicked out of my house, and you have all these killer dykes, and I just can't show this to my mom. And I understand that, and I'm very aware that I live in a world that's privileged, where I can have badass, you know, characters, and that not everybody is at that place. So I feel like we have to acknowledge our own privilege in being able to even tell these stories.
Yeah. I've also just personally been thinking, like, being Arab, like from the Middle East, and Arab American, like they're really different things. They're like radically different, and like I'm starting to like conclude that like it may not be the most important thing actually to connect with like people living in the Middle East, because I don't know, they're just like it's really not the same. And I actually found that often times like people from Lebanon, like there's this confrontational kind of affect to Arab Americanness or Arab Americanity. I think they think there are like memes about it, right? There are memes about like mango trees and like, you know, like really cliche imagery that they think that we're writing about, and it's just like sometimes too overwhelming of a disconnect for
Well, and I think also it's very different to be a queer Arab in America versus a queer Arab in Lebanon or Palestine or Jordan or wherever.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just a really different existence. So.
I guess so. I think I was like kind of trying to ask the question in the direction that you went in and just didn't.
For sure.
So I guess like how much do you feel like you should be in dialogue with the Arab world? Like how much is it part of your work? Do you feel like if it's not that that's a problem, or is it just like part of? I ask as someone who lives here and who writes and who doesn't know the answer to this question. There's not like a right one that I'm looking for. I want to know what you're thinking.
Well, I think, yes, you should be in dialogue with the Arab world. Even if you're not Arab, you should be in dialogue with the Arab world. But how that, I think it permeates our work. I mean, I feel like it's there, but I feel like I can't speak truthfully to that existence. I can speak truthfully to my observation of what's going on politically, culturally, whatever, historically. But yeah, I think it affects us in that we're trying to, in some ways, educate people who aren't aware of what's going on. But in other ways, it's, again, I can't speak truthfully to that experience, so I want to be careful about trying to appropriate somebody else's story.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the process of writing Extra Transmission was very much like thinking about my perspective as an Arab American and trying to offer an alternative to, in some ways, to American readers to begin to start thinking about the like horrors and violences of the U.S. military's role in the war on terror. And I also see like books of poetry and project length books, which I feel like my book is a project, as not being like the lone voice or like the lone judgment on a situation or a dialogue, is like entering into some kind of like global conversation around all of these topics and hopefully pushing the conversation a little bit more in the radical direction.
And sometimes, you know, some of my work is very political and about like really controversial issues, but sometimes I'm telling a story and I just stick an Arab character in there. Like the menopause story really has nothing about Arabs except Mamul and her name. There's nothing in the story that is about being Arab. It's really a story about menstruation, about blood, about menopause. But because the main character is Arab, I feel like it's important sometimes just to have Arabs running around in my stories that aren't doing anything so, you know, overly Arab. And I think that's just a really important thing to do.
Are there more questions?
I have a question for you. How does your writing and your film work? Like, how do you, like, did you do one before the other? Or were you interested in both mediums, or how does that work?
Yeah, totally. Well, I've my like disciplines were primarily poetry and like being in punk bands, and then out of that has grown this like poetry and like kind of more performance art practice, and the book was like long gone to print when me and Lexi, who's in the audience, the art director of the film, and Dorsey Bass, who did the score, the music for the film, and I were in a band together for a couple of years. And so that was like very much a project in collaboration, thinking about how to bring poetry, or like how to translate poetry to non-poets or something. I feel like this is a problem I come up with a lot. Is like I work for a small press and I'm constantly trying to get people who don't read poetry to read poetry, and it's this like endless battle. So thinking about like collaboration and collectivity and multidisciplinary practices. And I went on the Sister Spit tour in the spring of last year, and I was on tour with 7 other cutie pock poets and performers, and everyone had a very interdisciplinary practice. And I was like, I need to push my practice to the next level because poetry is not enough for me. So began with the stapling.
There's something about there's something about having the visual with the words, and I mean that's what I love about comics is that you can, you can tell stories in different ways when you have words and pictures.
And also like the questions of like, how do you make a poetry reading fun? Let you all think about that.
Make it shorter. Any more questions? Any residual thoughts even?
Are we going to have a tornado? I would like to see a tornado.
I've never seen one.
Really? I've seen them a lot. I grew up in the Midwest, so I've seen a lot of tornadoes. But there was actually a tornado in Brooklyn. When was it? It was a few years back, yeah.
Huh.
And it hit all the trees in front of my building.
Tornado time. Okay, thanks everyone for coming, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.